Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed. A new bill to ban supporters of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement has just been passed into Israeli law. Even those who boycott West Bank settlement products are being targeted by the legislation, and ILTV's Aaron Porras joins us with more. Aaron, I almost got your name wrong there.
I saw that.
All right, so tell us, what is the scoop?
All right, well, the bill passed its third and final reading on Monday. And the good thing is that it doesn't target everybody. So, we have foreign nationals with residency permits here in Israel are not included in the ban, and the foreign ministry would still have the ability to make exceptions just like they did before.
Sponsors of the bill, like MK Roy Folkman from the Kulanu Party, say, quote, "It's possible to feel both national pride and also believe in human rights. It is also possible to defend the name and honor of the State of Israel, and this is no embarrassment," end quote. MK Dov Chanin from the Joint Arab List said Israel would be isolating itself and antagonizing BDS supporters. Several boycott supporters or members of organizations that support BDS have already been stopped from entering the country before, the first time with Isabel Firi from Malawi just this past December.
Anyone who's ever lived in the Middle East knows what it's like to be awakened at dawn by the Muslim call to prayer being broadcast over loudspeakers from local mosques. Here in Israel, for some, the sound is beautiful, but for others, it's time to turn down the volume. A new two-part bill to muffle the amplified prayers has just won preliminary approval during a very heated debate in the Knesset. One of the versions would ban the summons to worship through loudspeakers between 11 at night and 7 in the morning, which would effectively mute one of the 5 daily Muslim broadcasts. The other bars the calls in residential areas at all hours and carries a $2,700 fine for violations. Supporters of the bill say it's not anti-Muslim and is only aimed at improving the quality of life of people living near mosques who are forced to hear the morning calls before 5 a.m. every day.
זה מה שבא החוק לומר, חוק חברתי שבא להגן על שנתם של האזרחים בלי לפגוע חס וחלילה באמונתם של אדם זה או אדם אחר, לא מדת האסלאם, לא מדת היהדות ולא בכל אמונה אחרת באלוהים. האמונה הזאת היא משותפת לנו. אללהו אכבר, אלוקים הוא גדול.
But Arab legislators are denouncing the measure as discriminatory. Several Arab Knesset members are claiming the bill unfairly impinges on the religious freedom of Israel's Muslim minority, which makes up almost 20% of the population. Even some of Israel's left-wing parties are against the legislation, which is being sponsored by their rivals on the right.
קואליציה קטנה, עלובה, גזענית, רדודה, נכנעת לכמה קיצוניים עלובים, וכולכם מתייצבים, ואתם עושים תחרות מי יצעיר יותר נאמנות לשנאת ערבים. הקואליציה הזאת השתגעה, אתם לא נורמליים, זה אחד הימים פשוט הכי מחפירים שאני זוכרת בכנסת ישראל.
The neighboring state of Jordan, which runs the Waqf group that manages Islamic holy sites in Israel, is also opposing the legislation. Amman says it violates human rights as well as its peace treaty with Jerusalem. But Israel insists it's committed to protecting the religious rights of all faiths and that the government battles discrimination against its Arab citizens. The proposal's backers point out that since it only applies to residential areas, the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, Islam's third holiest site, would be exempt from the restrictions. Now the disputed legislation will go to committee for further discussion before any of the 3 votes necessary to become law are taken in what is likely to be a very lengthy process. Now, get this, Arab media sources are saying that Hamas is about to release a rather unexpected new version of its charter. The document will reportedly outline Palestine according to the 1967 boundary lines, although no big surprise here, it will continue to deny the Jewish state's right to exist. The amended charter is being drawn up in Qatar by the terror group's leaders ahead of its release next month. If true, their declaration of a state alongside the pre-6-day war lines marks a major shift in policy. Since being founded in late 1980s, the radical Islamists have insisted on reclaiming all of historic Palestine. Now the group may even sever ties to the Muslim Brotherhood terror group. This is all in an apparent bid to foster new Arab regional partners like Egypt. Hamas is nevertheless expected to perpetuate its commitment to Israel's destruction that has always been one of the group's main goals. Since seizing control of Gaza in 2007, the terrorists have murdered hundreds of Israelis in 3 major conflicts, suicide bombings, and thousands of missile attacks. And despite denials to the contrary, the group is extremely anti-Semitic. Its current charter contains shocking propaganda against the Jewish people, including several Nazi ideologies and radical Islamist rhetoric. It looks like there's finally a lead to who's behind this shocking wave of bomb threats targeting Jewish communities in the United States. The first suspect has been arrested, and his name is Juan Thompson. The 31-year-old Missouri resident is suspected of carrying out 8 copycat threats, mostly by email. All occurred after the first flood of phone threats in early January. Prosecutors say he perpetrated the acts in his ex-girlfriend's name as part of a bizarre campaign to make her look like an anti-Semite as well as a child pornographer. His alleged targets include a Jewish museum in New York and the ADL Anti-Defamation League that monitors hate groups. But the ADL says Thompson's been on their radar even before that because of his history of public rants against white people. Thompson had been a reporter for the Intercept News website until being fired last year on suspicion of fabricating sources and quotes. On Friday, the suspect had his first appearance in a St. Louis court on 1 count of cyberstalking. Now he's expected to remain in federal custody until his likely extradition to New York to face prosecution. Detectives are also questioning him about the desecration of 154 gravestones at a Jewish cemetery in St. Louis last month. Ever since the last U.S. election, it seems like American lawmakers have been divided over quite a lot of issues, but there's one thing they clearly agree on, that the current wave of anti-Semitism must be stopped.
In a rarely seen act of unity, all 100 U.S. senators signed an open letter demanding President Trump take immediate action to halt the nationwide spike in anti-Jewish activity. The bipartisan call warns that human lives will be endangered if the phenomenon is ignored. The text is also being sent to the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the U.S. Attorney General, urging greater involvement by law enforcement officials. There have now been 6 major bomb threat campaigns targeting Jewish facilities across America, the most recent of which was only yesterday. The senator's letter blasted the incidents as unacceptable, un-American, and cowardly. They insist the Trump administration devote its full resources to confronting the threats, including federal assistance to the victims and enhanced security measures. Almost all of the most prominent American Jewish organizations are embracing the bipartisan call for action. The head of the Anti-Defamation League says the legislators are demonstrating a unified moral front against hatred and sending a strong message that in our America, a threat against one of us is an attack on all.
Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman is in Washington this week for his first official visit since U.S. President Donald Trump took office in January. The trip comes amid a changing atmosphere in U.S.-Israeli relations.
The Israeli military chief was greeted with an honor guard at the Pentagon, where he held talks with U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis. Iran and Syria topped the 2 leaders' talks. The Israeli defense minister also told Mattis that Jerusalem is concerned over the apparent transformation of Lebanon's army into a branch of the Iran-backed Hezbollah terror group. Both men voiced support for the formation of an anti-terror coalition of moderate forces in the region. During discussion of their nation's shared commitment to stability in the Middle East, Lieberman called on America to take an active role. He went on to stress that the unwavering security ties between Jerusalem and Washington help contribute to regional and therefore global stability. During his visit to the U.S., Lieberman is also scheduled to meet with Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. According to the State Department, the Trump administration is in discussion with Israel about holding back on settlement construction in the West Bank. But a spokesman refused to comment on Lieberman's recent assertion that the far right-wing proposal to extend extend Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank would spark an immediate crisis with the new administration. The White House says it's still analyzing the Israeli-Palestinian peace process to decide its next steps, but is calling on both sides to act reasonably in the meantime.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Donald Trump are maintaining close contact amid continuing aggression from a defiant Iran. The American leader called the Israeli premier on Monday to discuss dangers emanating from Iran and threats the Islamic Republic is posing in the region. They also discussed the 2015 International Nuclear Pact, which is opposed by their mutual administrations. The conversation comes in the wake of reports that Iran test-fired 2 missiles in the Persian Gulf over the weekend. Both Jerusalem and Washington are outraged by the test, claiming that such a drill is banned by the United Nations. Meanwhile, the United States is reeling after Tehran deployed several of its fast attack speedboats to harass a U.S. Navy ship in the Strait of Hormuz. Last month, the Trump administration warned the Islamic Republic that it had been put on notice by imposing a series of sanctions on entities connected to Iran's ballistic missile program. The new American administration has adopted a more combative approach to dealing with the Islamic Republic, which has been warmly welcomed by the State of Israel. Iran has been steadily increasing its influence in the Middle East as the 6-year-old Syrian conflict rages on. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced that he's going to Moscow for talks with the Russian president to express vigorous opposition to the possibility of Iran establishing a permanent presence in Syria.
ביום חמישי אני אפגש עם הנשיא פוטין במוסקבה. במרכז השיחה שלנו תעמוד סוריה, ניסיון לגבש שם הסדר. במסגרת ההסדר הזה, או גם בלעדיו, יש ניסיון של איראן להתבסס באופן קבוע בסוריה, או בנוכחות צבאית קרקעית, ובנוכחות צבאית ימית, וגם בניסיון הדרגתי לפתוח מולנו חזית ברמת הגולן בסין.
According to Jerusalem officials, Israel has already stopped Iran from moving forces into the Syrian Golan Heights several times, which is just over Israel's northern frontier. Iran has even deployed the nation's Revolutionary Guard forces in the region, as well as the nation's Shiite Muslim proxies. In response, Israel has carried out dozens of strikes to prevent weapon smuggling to the Iranian-backed Lebanese terror group Hezbollah through Syria. The Israeli Prime Minister now wants to discuss a recent agreement with Russia to coordinate military action in the skies over Syria, all as a means of avoiding the accidental trading of fire.
שנוכל להגיע גם להבנות מסוימות כדי להמעיט את החיכוך האפשרי בין הכוחות שלנו ושלהם, כפי שעשינו בהצלחה עד היום.
While both Moscow and Tehran are allies of the Damascus government, it's Russia that seems to be holding the balance of power in achieving any future deal on Syria's future. Yet the first UN-led peace talks held in a year to resolve the conflict ended last Friday without a breakthrough in sight. The phone call from U.S. President Trump has actually come right in the middle of a session police are holding with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. This is the 4th time the premier has been questioned as part of an ongoing corruption investigation against him. Netanyahu offered apologies to the investigators for having to suddenly take the call and leave the room. The premier is at the center of 2 cases. One involves his suspected receipt of gifts from businessmen. The other is about allegations he arranged to limit competition in the media sector for an Israeli newspaper publisher in exchange for more positive coverage. Once the probe is concluded, police could decide to dismiss the charges. The other possibility is that they'll recommend the Attorney General indict the 67-year-old leader. This would most likely lead to the Prime Minister's resignation. The Supreme Court set a precedent in 1993 that ministers must step down if they are charged with corruption. That scenario would almost certainly mean the holding of new national elections. And even though Netanyahu adamantly denies any wrongdoing, it appears his political rivals may already be maneuvering in a search to line up his successor in a post-Bibi Israel. There was a dramatic exchange of gunfire in Ramallah last night during the attempted arrest of a wanted Palestinian terrorist. The outside of the suspect's home appears peaceful today, but inside tells another story. Numerous bullet shells litter the floor alongside an Arab kefye. Israeli soldiers and military police came to the West Bank city of Ramallah to take the suspect into custody, but during the arrest raid, he began shooting at the security forces. The Palestinian gunman was killed in the exchange when they returned fire. Palestinian health ministry officials have confirmed the death and have identified the man as Basel al-Agaj. They say his body has been retained by Israeli authorities. A local witness at the scene described the incident.
اللي صار بالضبط انه صار اشتباك بينهم وبينه الجيش اطلق قذيفه عليه في السده هون في المنطقه الصغيره هون مكان قاعد وعندها قام بسحل جثمانه عبر الدرج من فوق السده للدرج تحت واخذوه على بعض الطابق. كان واضح شفته صورته انه دمه موجود على الارض لانه الجيش كان بيسحب فيه على الارض.
Two firearms were found at the scene. Police say the 31-year-old shooter was the leader of a cell that's been conspiring to launch attacks on Israeli targets. No Israeli troops were injured during the operation. 2 American tourists and 37 Israelis have been killed in a period of sporadic violence that began in October 2015, but has tapered off in recent months. During that same time, at least 237 Palestinians have been killed in Israel and the Palestinian territories. Jerusalem authorities say that at least 159 of those killed were assailants who launched stabbing, shooting, and vehicle ramming attacks. The others died during arrest operations, clashes, and protests. Israel is blaming the surge on a campaign of incitement by the Palestinian leadership. A controversial new bill is being advanced that would immediately hand passports to newcomers as soon as they immigrate to Israel. Law enforcement officials agree that such a move would make the lives of many immigrants easier, but they're worried the main people who will benefit could end up being criminals. Today, new Israelis can only be issued passports once they've been living in the country for an entire year and can officially prove that it's their primary place of residence. The Israel Beitenu party is now pushing to make it so that these immigrants can get passports right away, saying it's not necessary for them to live in Israel full-time and that it should be easier for them to visit their relatives back home during those first 12 months. But the Public Security Ministry is against the legislation, and so are the police. A position paper on the topic from the Police Investigations and Intelligence Unit says the waiting period is necessary to conduct background checks. It specifically accuses immigrants from the former Soviet Union of wanting to exploit Israel and its national passport, as they have in the past. Israeli Defense Minister and Israel Beitenu party chief Avigdor Lieberman is shooting back by slamming that document as a hate crime against the nation of his birth. His faction is also pointing out that all immigrants are already required to provide records showing criminal-free backgrounds. Besides that, they say anyone can be denied citizenship if there's intelligence that they're planning to use their Israeli nationalities for illicit purposes. For now, the bill is moving forward to the Knesset, where it has to be debated and approved in 3 separate sessions before it can become law. Here in Israel, both men and women are required to serve in the military, and while only 7% of Israeli combat soldiers are women, that's all starting to change. Tough comes in all shapes and sizes, and the Israeli army wants to make sure that every person has the same opportunity to fight for their country, but it's not only about equal rights.
The IDF need all the men and all the women, that are able to fight, that are able to participate in the defense missions that they have. And of course, it's also equal opportunities, but first of all, it's the mission, and it comes in order that the army will be much more effective.
This is where the Haram Artillery Battalion comes in. The unit happens to be the IDF's longest-running mixed-gender combat battalion, meaning that men and women face off against each other as part of their training sessions. Lotham Stapleton is a physical education officer for combat soldiers, and she coaches all genders in techniques like Krav Maga, the Israeli defense fighting.
היום 85% מהתפקידים פתוחים לנשים. אנחנו גם מדברים על זה לפתוח רק עוד ועוד ועוד תפקידים. וזהו, הצבא הולך לקראת משהו ממש טוב בעיניי.
כמעט מחצית מהסד"כ זה לוחמות, מפקדות, קצינות, ככה שלאף אחד מאיתנו זה לא חריג לקבל הוראות בחורה או קצינה, וגם זה לא, אף אחד לא מרגיש שזה פחות טוב מאשר גבר.
According to Israeli law, both men and women are obliged to join the army when they turn 18. Israel's Arab citizens and many from the ultra-Orthodox community are usually exempt from the policy. But with more and more combat positions being opened up to women, the politics of the military are beginning to change because more females are filling up leadership positions.
I think that the IDF is very advanced by giving women equal opportunities. We can see it in high ranks. That women get to high ranks. We can see it in opening more combat units for women, and I think that when the years will pass, we will see much more equal opportunities for women.
But it's not only giving women equal opportunities in the military. The IDF has real needs to fill in, and many Israeli women are stepping in with strength and pride.
היו פעמים שגברים הרגישו שאנחנו לוקחות להם את המושכות. כי מה זאת אומרת, אנחנו עכשיו נגרז ואנחנו נכין ואנחנו נראה ואנחנו ננטרל את האויב. גם אנחנו יכולות וגם אנחנו יודעות ואנחנו עושות את זה טוב. וכן, הרבה פעמים רואים מהצד שהם קצת אוכלים את עצמם, אבל הם לומדים לפרגן. הם אחרי הכל איתנו 3 שנים. הם לומדים האיכות שלנו והם לומדים שאנחנו טובות בדיוק כמוהם, אם לא יותר.
Excitement is out of the ballpark in Seoul, South Korea today, where Israel's national baseball team just scored an impressive 4-2 victory over the Netherlands at the World Baseball Classic. The blue and white is really swinging its way to the top of the 16-country competition. Today's triumph is especially remarkable when you remember this is the first time Israel's ever appeared at the WBO. Now, the Jewish national squad has a sterling 3-0 record after early defeats of the hometown favorite South Korea, 2-1, and the clobbering of the Chinese Taipei with a score of 15-7. Today's ball game was a nail-biter for some because the Netherlands also had the same 2-0 status in the group stage going in, and even though the Dutch were initially considered an underdog before coming up to bat, the team still ranks far above the Jewish state. Israel is being described as the tournament's unexpected darling for its amazing success. The team's now advancing to the second round in Tokyo, where it'll be taking on the Japanese national team this Sunday. We're all going to have to be patient to see who's the ultimate champion, though, because it's only after this next phase that the 4 semifinalists will determine the championship round to see who takes home the 2017 trophy for the Classic, which is being held in Los Angeles on March 20th to the 21st. All right, here's some more exciting historical news. Archaeologists have just discovered a 2,000-year-old Emperor's Road in Beit Shemesh, which is just 20 miles west of Jerusalem. And that's not all. They even found a set of ancient coins. ILTV's Aaron Porras is back in the studio with more. Aaron, tell us the details.
All right, well, this ancient, wide, and well-preserved 2,000-year-old road dates all the way back to the Roman period. Let's take a look at my report and see more.
It was discovered last month during excavations carried out by the Israel Antiquities Authority. On Tuesday, the director of the excavation, Irina Zilberbad, said that the road had been close to 6 meters in width and stretched for roughly 2.5 kilometers. Zilberbad was quoted as saying, quote, "The road was apparently built to link the Roman settlement that existed in the vicinity of Beit Natif with the main highway known as the Emperor's Road, and that the road served as a main artery connecting several large settlements of Eleutheropolis, or modern-day Bet Guvrin and Jerusalem." She went on to say that, quote, "During the Roman period, as a result of military and other campaigns, the national and international road network started to develop in unprecedented manner. The Roman government was well aware of the importance of the roads for the proper running of the empire," end quote.
That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.